What is noodlin', nerds? It's another edition of Just Play It, except this is our very first special. Welcome in. Special edition. This is a episode where we're not reviewing a movie.
Per se.
We'll be looking into a category of movies. While it was supposed to be E3 this week, we were going to talk about video game movies. But apparently E3 is canceled, so thanks E3.
Get wrecked, E3. Get canceled.
I was trying to be relevant and help you out, but I guess not.
They really would have appreciated the weight of our podcast, propelling them forward.
The plug.
We'll do it anyway, though, for us.
We thought it'd be nice and topical to bring up movies and shows adapted from video games. What happens when the studios do this? This is the question. This is what we're mostly going to be talking about. Rarely they are successful, but most of the time they just don't work. And now why is that? That's going to be the question. Nick and I are gamers. I think is a fair statement to say. We've been gaming since kindergarten, first grade.
I can't even remember how long it's been.
Controller just got put in my hands at 6 years old.
Nimble little child fingers playing Mario. Donkey Kong Country, I think, is the first real memory I have of playing a video game.
Nick, I gotta say, your household seems like the type of spot that had pretty much all the consoles. Can you kind of rattle off what consoles your dad, your brothers had?
Yeah, so this was a fun part about growing up with brothers. I have two brothers. And so for each birthday or whenever we'd save up money, each one of us would buy a console. So we never really had to choose when there were console wars, right? When it was Nintendo or Sony, we never had to make that decision. We had all of them. So, I mean, gosh, go back to the original.
Give me the list in chronological order.
NES, SNES, Nintendo 64, PlayStation, Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, GameCube, a Wii, Xbox 360, Xbox One.
Original Xbox 2, right?
We didn't actually have the original Xbox.
Okay. You had the PS2? Is that why?
Yeah, I had the PS2. At that time, there wasn't as many console-specific games, so everything you could play on PS2, you could essentially get on Xbox as well. Minus Halo, I think, was the biggest break of the consoles. But
you, of course, have the most current gen Xbox, I believe.
I do.
Your brother has a Nintendo Switch. Game Boys. What Game Boys did you guys have?
Oh, all the Game Boys. Pocket, Color, Advanced, SP, DS.
You get those attachments that clip on and they like magnify the screen or the flashlight.
With the built-in light, so you could play in the dark.
Yeah, play in a dark car ride on a road trip or on the airplane.
Play your Pokemon, get the linking cable with your brothers. Oh yeah, man. We were serious. I had my Game Boy travel case. Fit the games in there and the Game Boy and my charging cables. That was a big deal.
What a time.
It was a big deal. My brothers and I definitely fought and bonded a lot over video games. They were a major staple of our household.
A huge part of our lives, I'll say.
Of yours and I mean, a lot of our friendship was based on going over to each other's houses after school and just playing video games.
A lot of split screen action. These days we are playing online.
That's just the way of the road.
So
and being a few thousand miles away.
We're not going to jump into plot talk because we're just talking about a category of movies, but we're going to jump into topics and tidbits. So Nick, what's like your favorite types of games or specific games? And do you have any particular reason as to why any games pop out or just a category?
I'm a big fan of open world games these days. I like having options. I like exploring a lot. I like kind of blazing my own trail with my character. Also, I like first-person shooters. Always have, always will. They're something I'm just randomly good at, and so they're a lot of fun. But I would say I like games mostly with a specific story. I mean, I like playing online, multiplayer, all the fun things. But I do like story-driven games. So, for example, my favorite video game franchise of all time is the Batman Arkham series. Right after that is games like BioShock. Very immersive games, character development, right? Almost like a movie. Games that make you feel like you're part of the universe, I'll say.
I couldn't agree more. I gravitate towards single player narrative games. I absolutely love those. Open world as well, kind of like IPs like the Spider-Man game for PlayStation 4. We're playing Hogwarts Legacy right now, so that's very open world, a lot of side missions, side quests. Jedi Fallen Order. I have Jedi Survivor ready to go. Just need to start playing it. So I'm really into video games based on movies as well, or comic books. And then we started playing Fortnite like a couple of years ago, and now I was like, I'm a single player narrative guy, and I don't want to pay for online stuff. And it was free, and now I love Battle Royale. I think that type of gameplay is very fun.
Yeah, it's non-repetitive, I think, is what's fun. There's nothing worse than when a game gets repetitive.
That's how I kind of felt with GTA 5. Like, I did the story, I did all this crazy stuff, I got all the expensive cars, I got all the money in the world, and then I was just like stuck running around Los Santos and the redneck meth county, and I was just like, I'm kind of done.
I mean, you look at the most popular, I believe the most popular video game of all time is Minecraft, for the exact reason we're talking about. It's just an endless world with options, right? People like options. But we're going to get into this with movies. Sometimes that doesn't lend itself to movies.
Let's talk about some video game movies. Nick, I got a little bit of a game for you.
Okay.
So there's roughly 40 to 50 well-known video game movies.
Okay.
And I'm going to see if you could just kind of take a stab at what are the worst 5 rated movies based on video games and what the best 5 movies based on video games are.
Okay.
Think you could do it? Do you want me to kind of rattle off names, or do you just kind of want to take a blind shot in the dark at it?
Let me take a stab at it.
You want to start with the bottom 5 or the top 5?
I'll start with the bottom 5 because I have some ideas. Now, I will say there's been some random video game movies that have come out that I may not be aware of, but
they very well may be at the bottom, but there is 2 clear winners that are rated very poorly. And we're going with our Just Play It formula of taking the average from both Rotten Tomatoes critic and fan, both Metacritic critic and fan scores, and the IMDb stars into account. So we average those 5 numbers out. That's where we're going to land for the final rating, just for our specific formula and consistency for how we scale movies based on other people's opinions. Because if you go to Rotten Tomatoes, it could have a completely different score from Metacritic.
Now, are these critic scores?
It's everything. It's critic, fan, and then just the blanket IMDb score, which kind of acts as an average between the two.
All right.
Bottom 5, hit me.
I do know there's a few fighting games that were made into movies that never succeed.
I'll give you bonus points. There was a lot, and I did a lot of number crunching, and honestly, it made my head hurt. And I was like, I think I got the bottom 5. I think I got the top 5. And I wrote down a lot of honorable mentions. So if you hit an honorable mention, I'll give you a point.
Okay. Street Fighter, the Chun-Li movie, was rated really poorly. I know it back in like the 2000, right after high school, they did a Tekken movie. And I think that may have been like, it was reviewed as perhaps maybe one of the worst movies of all time. Off the top of my head, I might say the Hitman movie. Hitman did not please the critics, and I'll go.
Now, there was 2 Hitman movies. Do you have a specific one?
Gosh, what was the second one called? Agent 47?
Correct. There's Hitman with Timothy Olyphant and Agent 47 with somebody.
Yeah, I think the first Hitman didn't really hit, so I don't know how you can get to the second. I don't know how a studio greenlit that. And then I'll go with Doom. Doom was with The Rock was really bad. There is one that my dad loved in the 90s, but I know it's really bad. And we used to play this video game on the Super Nintendo all the time. It was Double Dragon. The same way we reviewed Spawn, were like 90s comic book movies. I mean, really any video game adaptation you tried in the 90s was dead on arrival. So those are my 5. How'd I do?
Honestly, I'm looking at Double Dragon right now.
I don't even know if it has that many reviews, to be honest. It might. I just know it wasn't good.
Double Dragon on Rotten Tomatoes has a 12 and a 26.
Okay.
And a 3.9 on IMDb.
Okay.
So it's definitely down there. For whatever reason, I can't find the Double Dragon movie on Metacritic, so it may not qualify. But so if you want to throw in a substitute movie in lieu of that one.
Max Payne.
Okay, so name me your bottom 5 once more.
Tekken, Street Fighter Chun-Li version movie, Hitman Agent 47, Doom, and then I said Max Payne.
Well, I will reveal the bottom 5 movies. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So we actually have a 2-way tie for 4th, I guess.
Yeah, it'd be T4.
Tied for 4th place with an average 28.6% rating is Street Fighter 1994 with Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Oh, man.
And this movie called
What a movie.
Blood Rain.
Can't say I'm familiar.
I was going to say it's something I don't recognize at all.
Okay.
Coming in at number 3 at 21.4 out of 100. We have Street Fighter The Legend of Chun-Li.
Okay. There we go.
That's the point.
I remember that one coming out. It came out right after like Street Fighter 5 came out. Like, we have momentum. It's like, no, you don't.
And I'm looking up this guy, this director. His name is Boll. His first name is UWE, and his last name is BOLL.
Okay.
This guy has directed a lot of these really shitty video game movies. I'll list it off at the end here, but yeah, he just for whatever reason
keeps getting work.
His hand was in a lot of these. So the bottom 2, House of the Dead from 2003, coming in at a 12.8%.
Ooh.
So Boll directed this stinker. Yeah, I thought this one was a very clear winner, but then House of the Dead crept up as well. But it's another Boll joint. It's Alone in the Dark with Christian Slater.
Wow.
So that, I don't know if you've ever heard of that movie, but I can only imagine it's based on a horror movie. Once again, we have Street Fighter with Jean-Claude Van Damme, Blood Rain, Street Fighter, The Legend of Chun-Li, House of the Dead, and Alone in the Dark.
Well, now I have to know, how did Tekken do? I remember it only like getting less than $2 million box office.
So Tekken, is it 2010?
Yes.
Well, Tekken from 2010 has a 4.8 on IMDb. It doesn't even have a critic score. A 31% for the fan score.
Doesn't even have a critic score?
No critic score at all.
Critics just couldn't even bother.
I would just call it disqualified at that point. So
yikes.
I'll give you half a point. But honorable mentions: Silent Hill Revelation, 31 out of 100. Mortal Kombat Annihilation from 97, coming in at a 31.2.
Yep.
In the Name of the King, a Dungeon Siege Tale.
I remember this one.
Which is another Boll directed movie.
That stars Jason Statham.
It does.
See, some of these, I remember the movie coming out, and I didn't know it was a game.
Hitman Agent 47.
There it is.
35%. The Super Mario Bros., the 1993 one with John Leguizamo, that live action one.
Yep.
Bizarre. Max Payne from 2008, coming in at 36%.
Marky Mark.
Doom is coming in at 38.8.
Yep.
So with video game movies here, really there's a handful of decent to maybe good ones, and then it just drops for those last back 40. So Nick, now that you kind of have a reference of the bottom 5, you want to hit me with a top 5? What do you think the top 5 best reviewed video game movies are?
I can give this a shot. I believe Sonic the Hedgehog was reviewed favorably. Detective Pikachu was received well. I believe the Angry Birds movie was received very well. I want to say the original Mortal Kombat movie probably has a pretty big following from like the mid-90s. And then I'll say the most recent Super Mario Bros. Movie. Those are my 5.
Very, very great answers there.
And notice they're almost all of those are recent, with a lot with when animation, technology has been able to keep up with the video game animations.
So revealing the top 5 rated video game movies, we have another T4.
Okay.
At the low end of the top 5, we have Sonic the Hedgehog.
Okay.
And Angry Birds Movie 2. Both coming in with a 70 flat rating. Number 3, a movie called Werewolves Within from 2021. This game is, I think, a PlayStation VR game, and it's one of those, it's like Mafia.
Gotcha.
Like where you have to guess the bad person or guess the killer in the room.
Yep.
You could just take that idea and run with it for a movie.
You almost just take the name of the video game and slap it on there and take a lot of creative license.
It's a horror comedy. You got a simple idea, and then you just say, exactly what you said. Take the creative license, make a movie that is based off this video game, quote unquote. That's coming right above Sonic the Hedgehog and Angry Birds Movie 2 at a 70.2%.
Okay.
Coming in at number 2, we have Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
I forgot they did a second one.
Barely surpassing that. Yeah, that's the one with Knuckles.
Yes.
That is at a 71.2. And coming in at number 1, the Super Mario Brothers movie from 2023.
I figured.
It was not as well reviewed as I thought. It actually wasn't as good with the critics. That came in weighing in at 72%. So these are all like right up there. I will say the 6th man of the year, honorable mention, Pokemon Detective Pikachu, 67.8%.
Okay.
I'll give you
Makes sense.
So how many did you get there? You got 1. I mean, technically it's an Angry Birds movie, not Angry Birds Movie 2. Angry Birds Movie.
I don't get that one.
So I'll give you 1, 2. I'll give you 3 points. 3 points for the top 5. Did you say Hitman? I'll give you Hitman. I'll give you Doom. And I'll give you Max Payne. I'll give you 7 points. 7 points out of 10.
That's generous. I appreciate it.
7 points out of an optional 20, but whatever.
Now, I will say this before we get too much into, how things were reviewed. When it comes to movies like this, video game movies, even comic book based movies, I don't really care what the critics say. That's me personally.
To piggyback on that, I'm just going to reveal this honorable mention list real quick. We do have Tomb Raider, the 2018 one, 56.2%. Okay. Warcraft, this is the World of Warcraft movie from 2016. So this had a 57%. And again, this is the best after it really drops off. And that is where that movie in particular had a huge dichotomy between the critics and the fans. Critics, not impressed. Fans, absolutely loved it. So that's why it has such a funky rating. Mortal Kombat, the original, 60%. Uncharted from 2022, 60.2. And the new Mortal Kombat from 2021, 61.2. So, they're kind of like the C, grade on a curve, C+, B- of this whole phenomenon of video game movies.
Basically what you're saying there, it's hard to do that weighted average because for me, these movies are not made for critics. And honestly, I don't want the movie to be made for critic or the show to be made for critics, but I want this to be made for the fans of the existing video game because the critics don't understand it. If you haven't played the video game, you shouldn't understand really what's going on. You can't say, oh, I couldn't get immersed in this universe. There's already a whole fan base who's immersed in this universe. So that's on you, critic. It's not their job to make you fall in love with the IP. The IP already has a whole lot of love. So I think about the Super Mario movie, right? I think the critics was it rotten by the critic standards?
But barely. It's barely rotten. It's 59 from the critics, 96 from the fans.
So when I hear that, I don't care what the critics have to say. If fans loved it, if the people loved it, then I would count that as a success. So if I was creating a video game movie, all I would ever care about is the audience score. Because if you're a critic who doesn't love Mario, then of course you're not going to go into that movie and enjoy yourself. If you're trying to find a movie that has some sort of deep meaning behind it, sorry, it's Mario.
Do you want to hear the Rotten Tomato score of Alone in the Dark?
I would love to.
Critics 1%, fans 11%. That's tough.
You didn't make anybody happy.
And I was going to say, with these top movies and these bottom movies, What's the difference here? And what did the top have in common? What did the bottom have in common? The bottom is pretty much comprised of fighting video games and horror video games.
Well, something right off the bat that I notice from those two lists are content and who the audience is. Kids movies. Kids movies do well. Angry Birds, the animation in their Detective Pikachu's, Sonic's, Mario. Those are really good animated movies, and it's no secret that in 2023 these animated production companies know the formula.
And Pixar back in the day seemed like it was the only one in the early 2000s kind of pumping out computer animated movies that looked phenomenal. And now all the other studios kind of up their game too. So when video games want to go to Illumination or Sony or whoever, they know that they're capable of doing it. I think it's just a little bit more accessible for animation, and that's the whole difference with the Super Mario Brothers 1993 to 2023. The 1993 is a live action. You could even call it a cult classic because it's so bizarre. It's a live action Mario with an actual Yoshi dinosaur.
Yeah.
And a fucked up looking Bowser.
It was, slimy looking. You can't take something cartoonish and make it live action, in my opinion, when it comes to video, especially video games, especially in 1993 at that time when Mario was just pixels.
Yeah.
It's not even like we had the version of Mario we have today. You're talking 1993. We're talking this guy was 15 pixels on a screen.
And then you look at Super Mario Bros. 2023 and you're like, oh, Mario looks exactly the same as he does in the 3D video games, except for his smaller ass that people were upset about.
Dude, Mario has a donk. I'm tired of people not talking about it.
Look what they took from us.
I'm sick of it.
Give me that plumber butt.
Thanks, everybody.
The common ground with the top 5 is animated movies, with the exception of Werewolves Within, which takes a simple concept and gives it a whole new creative story. But then on the flip side, the bottom list, you got Street Fighter. Simple concept, but poor execution with a story. I think there's some sort of misunderstanding with the studios and what they think the fans want and what the fans actually want.
Well, those movies, especially, we're talking about a Street Fighter movie, is definitely a product of its time, right? You cast Jean-Claude Van Damme to be in this movie because you think everybody in the 90s, all they want is an action movie. So let's just take the characters that people know and throw them into an action movie that has nothing to do with Street Fighter. And to be honest, if you're an audience, you don't know the difference because there is no story to Street Fighter.
Right.
Choose your fighter and you fight. That's the extent that everyone knows Street Fighter.
And when I think about Werewolves Within, just going on my experience playing card games like Mafia or Werewolf, as it's called, there's an interesting strategy and gameplay there. So that can make for a very interesting story, I can see. I've never seen this movie. I haven't heard of it. Seems to be rated very well. Would love to check it out.
Yeah. And I'd say the last thing that separates those top movies and bottom movies would be cost effectiveness. Right? If you take on a very large project, you're going to need a lot of financial backing from your studio. And if a studio doesn't understand what you're trying to do with this video game movie, it's going to look cheap and schlocky and garbage. That's the thing with the animated. Animations become so cost effective for a lot of these studios. I'm not saying it's cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but when you compare it to live action, there's not as many barriers.
There's not as much thought that needs to go into how you're going to get it done.
Exactly.
If you're thinking like, oh, we're going to have a giant white albino gorilla rampage through the city with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, how are we going to do that on screen? Oh, we're shooting on this location. Oh, the VFX supervisor's on set. Oh, you can't light it this way. Oh, where's the monkey?
Yeah.
There's all that. And then animation is just like, give me the storyboard and we'll make it happen.
Yeah, I have character models already built for me in these video games, right?
We're ready.
So I don't have to really come up with, I don't have to do a lot of makeup and props to make these video game characters come to life. I could just take the 3D models that already exist in this video game universe and transfer it onto the big screen.
And just to round out our tidbits and topics, I'm just going to rattle off the box office scores of video game movies, the highest rated ones. I'll do a top 10. So coming in 10, we got 2012's Battleship with 300 mil. And then in number 9...
Would you call that a video game movie or just more of like a board game
No,
movie.
this. I'm going to go top 7.
Okay.
Top 7 video game movies grossing at the box office. Number 7, Angry Birds movie, $352 million. Then we got 2022's Uncharted at $400 million. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 at $405. Funny enough, Rampage, which wasn't well received critically, but that's coming in at $427 million. Pokemon Detective Pikachu, $428. Warcraft, $438. Now this is where it just blows the F up. The Super Mario Brothers movie 2023, which is still in theaters at this moment, $1.2 billion worldwide.
And counting. So I'm looking at the same list you are here, James, and something that strikes me as I look at these top 7, heck, even the top 20 video game movies, is the international box office numbers. And what's wild to think that I never think about really is that video games are global, right? Video games are ubiquitous around the world, especially when you talk about Mario. Japan, big video game culture. A lot of Asia, huge video game culture. Europe plays video games, right? So you're taking these characters who we think in the United States, right? Like these are our characters, these are our games, and for the most part they are. However, and Japan, a huge amount of the video game IP comes from them. But you have audiences around the globe, whereas if you're creating just an action flick with Liam Neeson, as much as I love it, you just don't get that same appeal internationally. So I'm looking at the Super Mario Bros. And I'm saying, okay, 537 million domestic, 689 million international. You have a bigger market outside of the United States, which is just not very common with most of Hollywood movies.
So we know that video game movies can be done well, and they can bring in a lot of money at the box office. But this brings us to our main point of this special. Why can't studios get video game adaptations right? And to expand upon this point, we're going to ask what works and what does not work, and why. We're going to take a look at not movies, but 2 recent television shows that have been released in the last year. These are a couple of prime examples that showcase both sides of the story. Nick, you're an Xbox guy. I am a PlayStation man. Mm-hmm. And so these 2 shows will be from these respective brands. And we have a lot of expertise and experience with these source materials and the TV shows because we were so excited when they were announced. So we're going to be breaking down Paramount Plus's Halo TV series and HBO's The Last of Us television series. Just to kind of set the mood here, Halo, with our rating system, is coming in at 60.2%, which honestly, going off our top percentage, is kind of on that graded curve of being, all right, I guess not bad, but in the grand scheme of things, 60 is a D or an F.
The show was an F. Not to give the game away here early, but...
And then HBO's The Last of Us, rounding out those 5 rating numbers, is weighing in at an 82.6%, which is great. Rotten Tomatoes skyrocketed, critic and fan. And then Metacritic, I think the critic score was a little low for whatever reason.
It caught the zeitgeist. So that was an example of a show that surpassed video games.
So these are 2 video games that we both adore. I absolutely love The Last of Us. When people ask me what's my favorite movie, I include that in the list because it plays like one of the best movies I've ever seen. The story is incredibly interesting and thought-provoking. On the other side of the table, Xbox, Mr. Nick, absolutely adore the Halo series.
I just think it's the greatest video game franchise of all time.
I love it. I love the passion. With that, I'm not too familiar with Halo. There's a story, right?
It's a long story that spans 6 games.
Okay, so with The Last of Us, there's currently 2 video games out. Part 1, Part 2. We didn't know Part 1 was a Part 1 yet until Part 2 came out. A very specific story timeline is told in that video game. And it's amazing. You should play it. When HBO announced that they were going to make a show, I was like, okay, all right, let's see. Because The Last of Us is from Naughty Dog, who also did the Uncharted video game series. And I've said this on, I believe, the Cutthroat Island episode. I said I love the Uncharted video game series. It's a treasure hunting video game franchise. And when the movie was announced, the movie actually it had a long, convoluted history of not getting made, not getting greenlit. Like at one point, I think David O. Russell, the guy who directed The Fighter with Mark Wahlberg, was going to direct it. And then Mark Wahlberg was going to be Nathan Drake. And then later down the line, they're like, scrap it. And then Sean Levy, who's a producer on Stranger Things, and he did Free Guy, apparently he was going to direct it. And Mark Wahlberg was kind of still attached, but not really. And then finally, they got it made with Tom Holland, who was going to play a younger version of the main character. Mark Wahlberg was going to play the older mentor character of Sullivan.
Victor goddamn Sullivan.
And I saw the casting. I was like, okay, Tom Holland, I can see it. Mark Wahlberg, not so much. Don't know why he's still attached. Love Mark Wahlberg. I did not think he was good for the role. I saw the trailer. I was like, they already changed 50% of the storyline.
Yeah.
I'm kind of annoyed at that. Saw the movie.
Crap. God damn it.
Not happy with it. Did not serve the fans well at all. They changed so much of the backstory, the origin story. Mark Wahlberg, he's not Sullivan. He's not Sullivan. I would have taken old man Tom Hanks. I think he would have been a great Victor Sullivan.
Well, this is what we were talking about earlier with the Street Fighter in the 90s, right? Where the studio took characters and then they created what they thought to be a good action film with just including those characters. And I think they did the same thing with Uncharted. They said, here's the characters, here's the general concept, and we're going to create just a very Hollywood version of an adventure movie.
The problem with the Uncharted movie is that the Uncharted games are great because of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
The characters of Nathan Drake and Elena Fisher and Victor Sullivan and Chloe Fraser, you fall in love with the characters, their design, their voice actors. And when you see it on the movie, you're like, that's not what they're supposed to sound like, or they wouldn't say that. This, like, where's the little quip here? When HBO announced that they were doing The Last of Us and the creative director Neil Druckmann was attached, I thought, I'm calling it right now. This is going to be good. And then they announced the cast, and I was like, they look the part. Love Pedro Pascal. I didn't know Bella Ramsey very well, but she's an actor on Game of Thrones, and she did great. So tell me about when they announced Halo. How fucking pumped were you?
Extremely excited. The idea of a Halo movie has been floating around for a very long time. I'd say probably about 15 years. There were projects that were greenlit, and they even had props up. They had a prop, the Jeep that they use in the game is called a Warthog. And there were leaks online of these Warthogs that were made for studios. The projects would get scrapped. There's a handful of fan-made YouTube series that live out there, and Halo fans were always clamoring for this story to be told. I was extremely excited. The trailer looked great. When I saw the trailer, they pumped a lot of money into this. The production quality was very good. The character designs were very good. The props, the costumes, the set. I mean, just really everything. They spared no expense in making this happen. The casting was fine. So I leading up to it, I was so excited.
Okay, so just jumping into it. On a scale of 1 to 10, rating the source material and how much they stuck to the lore and the story, if there was any story to stick to, give me a rating from 1 to 10, 10 being the best, 1 being the worst, and we will reveal our respective shows on 3, if you're ready.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. 9.5. Okay. Oh, wow. That's a huge difference there. Why 0?
Well, the story they told in the show doesn't exist anywhere in the games. The villain that they chose for the TV series does not exist in the video game universe. You had a lot of source material to work with, and you did not stick with any. I mean, there were some nods here and there to the game as far as where the characters come from, a little bit of their background, but the way the story progressed had 0, just 0.
So the reason why I was so interested in The Last of Us show is because The Last of Us video game, like I stated, is a very specific story and very specific things happen. There's plot points that happen, and you know all the major beats if you played that game once or twice, 3 times. So when they said the show was going to kind of fill gaps, I was really excited. I thought, oh, cool, they're going to stick with the main storyline, but we're just going to see different little kind of vignettes of what happened along the way. I was kind of shocked at how close they replicated the game. Like line for line, shot for shot, they really duplicated what the gamers experienced to what the casual TV viewers saw.
That's so smart, though. That's so smart.
It's smart, but the only thing that is kind of a bummer about it is Naughty Dog. I think Neil Druckmann actually said this about like an Uncharted movie. I think they were kind of dragging their feet on that for a long time because they said, we already made the movie we want to see. Like, you want the movie, play the game. It's so cinematic. The cutscenes are very well acted.
Yeah. They're all storyboarded and scripted. I mean, it's all
motion
it basically is
out.
Acted.
Yeah. No, it 100% is. They're on the sound stage. They're in their little motion capture suits and they're saying the lines in person with each other. And these are actors riffing and improvising and bringing a humanity character to the screen. So when they do it on the show and they recreate scenes line for line, I was geeking out because I could recite them. I was like, I know what he's going to say right here. And it was great. The only problem with it was that some scenes hit harder in the game. And they kind of, I wouldn't say fell flat in the show, but I was like, man, the game, this is one of the scenes of why I love the game so much, because it's so emotional. And then when I just saw it reimagined, not even reimagined, just duplicated, just recreated on screen, I was like, yeah, I was like, honestly, the video game played a little bit more emotional.
I think there's a part of that has to do with the experience of the game, like the payoff after passing usually like the best cutscenes are after a really difficult section of a game. Right? It's like the emotional payoff of trying this section over and over and finally getting through it and then having your heart ripped out in this moment. I'll reference another video game that series that I love, which was Gears of War. I believe that was just an Xbox property. And in the second one, the guy's wife, who you search for the whole first movie, he finds her halfway through the movie.
The game?
Through the game. Sorry,
See,
I'd like it to be a
blurring
movie.
the lines because video games are a work of art.
They truly are, and he has to put his wife out of his misery, and I had to turn the game off after that cutscene. I couldn't keep playing. I didn't feel right to continue to play, and it was after just this gauntlet of a section, and you finally get through it, and you're like, oh, his wife's on the other side, and then you just get the emotional. It kills you. It kills you inside. So I think there's just something to the experience of the emotional payoff of playing a game, knowing that you got through that section and you earned that cutscene, and then it hits you really hard.
I 100% agree.
And movies, it's just really hard to replicate that. I can't think of a scenario where a movie can really make that feeling happen.
That rings true to the fan experience. When playing The Last of Us, you come up to this very peaceful part near the very end, and then there's a door that you have to go to continue the story and continue the game. And I found myself just sitting there looking at the nice view, and I was like, I don't know if I want to go through this door right now. I just want to chill here in this moment where I know me and Ellie are good and we're at peace, and it's just a nice moment. And if I walk through that door, some shit's gonna happen. So it's video games are great. If you don't play video games, what the hell are you doing? Get out there, grab a controller, pick up a story-driven video game. They're great. So if The Last of Us wasn't sticking to the lore, they were making a slight deviation from the game. In Neil Druckmann's words, the director, the creator of the game, he said it was a change for the better. So they completely changed a character's story arc for one episode in the HBO series. And it was just the most touching and sweetest, beautiful love story I've ever seen on a television show. Where in the movie, it's a complete opposite plot point.
You mean the game?
There you go.
See,
God damn it.
here we are again.
So in the game, it's a completely different experience where this character is very brash and just screw him anyway. And then in the show, they make it all about him, and it's such like an HBO thing to do. Just kind of like, hey, we're gonna take this one random character,
Nick Offerman's character.
Nick Offerman's character. We're just gonna rip your heart out with Bill's story arc. And in the game, it's completely opposite. But they made a change for the better, and it doesn't steer away from the main plot and the main storyline.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with filling in gaps like that.
And another thing is with video games, you fill the gaps with combat most of the time.
Yes.
But for a show, you can't just have Pedro Pascal just murdering 50 people in a row while he gets from one side of Pittsburgh to the other.
You could do it once, but you can't do it, it can't be half of every episode.
So they'll make a completely new villain that wasn't in the game. Basically, this character embodied all of they're called smugglers in the game. She just like embodied like the many smugglers you have to murder in that game into like an actual character with a backstory, with a reason to kill this other character. And there's an episode where it takes place in the same exact type of setting. It looks the same. The stakes are the same. Different things are done because the character comes out and they have like an actual dialogue with our heroes. But it's just it's a crazy action sequence. And I was not expecting this because it's been very toned down because you lose all that combat from the game and you kind of focus more on the characters. But then they just surprise you with like, psych, this is a scene straight out of a video game where you just got to murder all these infected. It was awesome.
Yeah, I'll say for Halo, it was a little bit the opposite. The best parts of the show was when it was combat. And then everything else in between, they just didn't know how to... That's the problem
with action movies that don't have a story.
That don't have a story. Well, here's the problem with creating your own story, is that there is a built-in story to all of this that you can travel with, but you create your own story that no one has interest in, because I haven't played it. I don't care. That's the appeal of the video game movie. I've done this. I've played this. I beat this. Now let me sit down and watch it. That's what's fun about it.
This will transition into our next bullet point here nicely. So we're talking about sticking to the source material. How about the character design in Halo and the set design and just like the world itself? Did it feel like it was Halo, at least visually?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the most frustrating part. The character design was great. I'll just get to the biggest gripe I have with the show.
I think I know what it is.
Well, Master Chief,
he doesn't take off his helmet, right?
Halo. You've never seen his face in the video games. You've never seen his face. He's the super soldier. He's kind of like the Mandalorian. Like, he just doesn't show his face. He's always has his combat helmet on.
Or like Spider-Man. Stan Lee said that Spider-Man is so beloved from many cultures and races because he's just a masked hero. Nobody that could be anybody under the mask.
Well, Master Chief can't be just anybody. He's the best. He's the greatest Spartan. He's the greatest warrior basically in the universe. And he never takes his helmet off. And about halfway through episode 2, I believe it was, he removes his helmet, which I can live with. But then he spends half of the episodes without even his armor on.
This is not the way.
It's in no way, shape, or form the way. And then again, the characters were fine, but when the main villainous character is not a part of the video game lore, I don't understand. It's very frustrating to me because the Halo story is actually a very compelling story, right? You're fighting basically these prophets who have their armies. They're trying to activate these giant Halo rings that float in space to destroy the universe. And they're doing it out of some religious mission. And you need to stop them from doing it. But the Halo rings were put there to stop an even greater threat that you end up finding throughout the games, that actually it almost works as like a horror film, this secondary threat. So you start, like, if you look at it, you're like, how could you not create something at least adjacent to this? That's the most frustrating thing, because like I said, I saw
when you see the trailer you kind of see that sizzle reel and you're like, oh yeah.
The characters look great. The sets look great as far as what I expect to see in a Halo live action. And then it just gets let down by absolutely like all the money went there. They didn't go to the writers. And I don't think they had one of the Halo story staff. They couldn't have. They couldn't have had a single Halo writing staff as part of that crew.
Which is
whereas
why
with The Last of Us, as you're saying,
I had no confidence in the Uncharted movie because none of the creators from the game were affiliated at all in the writer's room.
Yeah.
And then so when you get the creative director, the game director, to be part of the producers and the writing staff, you know it's in the hands of the right man.
And that's something you look at the Mario movie we were just talking about. That was all internally done with Nintendo. That was all with them. They outsourced the animation, but they did not outsource anything else.
They keep their IPs very close. They
do. I respect them for it.
Character design, set design of The Last of Us, completely immersive.
It looks great.
One for one of the game. There's in the beginning episodes, I should say, in Boston. There's a shot where there's a skyscraper tilted over and it's resting on a different skyscraper, and that was like, that's straight out of the game. It looks exactly like the game. I'm in the same level as the game. The set decoration was great. The costume designs were, they didn't change a thing. They even made the custom shirts that the characters wear in the game. Really just no complaints there. So they had it on an immersive level, and they're going off one of the greatest stories that's ever been told, in my opinion. So, recipe for success, I would say. Nick, you're not really a big fan of the Halo series. Was there anything that they did right?
Again, like I said, the set, the money they put into it, the combat scenes where you actually had these Spartan characters in their combat gear fighting was awesome. It was great. It's what I watched the show for. Over the course of the entire miniseries, I got maybe 45 minutes of it. And that's just not enough to carry the shit storyline. So, like I said, the character design, set design, the world, that was all great. Even the acting was okay. These side plots they came up with, the main plot they came up with, it really felt like this Halo series was made for critics and for people who had never played the game before. Like, they were trying to just take the property and create this new story to get non-Halo fans to watch it. And I just don't know what would possess you to do that. I don't. How about let me ask you a question for The Last of Us. I know you love it, but in your opinion, was anything done wrong?
I can't really say anything was done wrong. Like I mentioned before, where some of the acted scenes, just for whatever reason, hit me harder playing the game. And I think that just has to go with the gamer's experience of being the character and feeling you have a lot of empathy for the characters that you're controlling because it's kind of you in a way. Some of the acting might have been better in some scenes in the game, than the TV show. And that's saying a lot because you got Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, who are two very talented actors, and they bring a lot to the table. The actors in The Last of Us, it's Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson. Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson are just doing a killer job. And video games kind of have a little bit of a, not to be meta, but a little bit of a cheat code when it comes to storytelling because they can alter the facial expressions later. If they feel like they didn't get if the director feel like he didn't get the exact performance he wanted, they can tweak the facial expressions and hold some silence here and there. And they can really manipulate and curate a really good scene. Not to say the actors aren't bringing anything to the table, but they do have that advantage. So if you didn't get it on set that day, they can do a lot more with the character's face and expressions and delivery. Apart from just changing minor things, minor story arcs, and honestly, they actually changed the way the infected operate. There was a lot more like kind of hive mind stuff put in the show, whereas in the game it's just kind of like infected zombies, and
they're just chaotic
Yeah, so the way they get infected is different, and I think they kind of wanted to do a little bit more scientific research to maybe have the broader audience kind of buy into the idea. It's like, if you do a project 10 years ago and then you recreate it 10 years later, you have full authority and the luxury to make changes for the better. They kind of did some loose scientific ties of how the outbreak started, how it spreads, and they kind of used that to their advantage for the show. So once again, if they were deviating from the games, it was for the better. Can't really say anything was done wrong. I would say I would just want a little bit more filling in of the gaps, because there was a lot of things just recreated, which I was a fan of, but at the same time, I do see the glass half empty on that concept.
Yeah, you don't want to just get a repeat of what you've already know.
You want something new. You're happy and very satisfied that they're sticking with the storyline and sticking with the timeline. But I would say if I had any critique, give me a little bit more original content. But honestly, I would probably rate the show in the high 8s, 8.8, 8.9. It was fantastic.
I'm very happy. Very happy for you as a fan of the game.
I'm sorry you did not
great
have
adaptation.
That. Sorry you didn't have that with Paramount Plus's Halo.
I did not.
So our last kind of point here has to do with the studios versus the creators. You need the creators in the room.
We've touched on this on other...
We're talking about Star Wars.
Other moments. Right.
You need a guy like Dave Filoni in the Star Wars writer's room. You need a fan of the source material, or you need a straight up creator of the source material.
Right. And the studios have to be confident handing that over to the creators. I don't know why you wouldn't be. They've clearly created an extremely successful video game and have amassed a following of tens of millions of people already. Why wouldn't you trust them with putting it on the big screen? I think because studios are dicks.
Facts.
And I think they just like having control.
We touched upon this in our review of Juice, where studios kind of put their hands on it and they're like, we think it'd be better this way. And then the actual person who's passionate about the story is like, well, that's not how I want it to go. And they're like, doesn't matter. We have the final say. We have distribution rights. You do what we say. We're the rich and famous, and you're just the director. You're just the writer.
Especially when you're in these studios and you're throwing so much money at these projects, right? It's hard for them to let go,
right?
Which sucks.
So studios suck, and we will never stop saying that here on Just Play It.
I shall not stop saying that.
I think to round out this special, video game movies, are they possible to make good? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, they are. You just need them in the right hands. And as we can see with the top 5, being it for kids, keeping it simple, not taking too much creative control, you can make a very successful movie.
Well, I want to touch on that too, on the for kids. I don't necessarily think it has to, I know I kind of made that comment
Box
earlier.
Office
but I don't
success, like for kids, will help.
Right. But I think the biggest thing is just playing to your audience, right? All those top ones for kids that obviously did well, did really good in the box office, but those are games made for kids, right? Mario, kids game. Sonic, kids game. Angry Birds, kids love it, right? Detective Pikachu, kids love Pokemon. If you're going to do a movie or a show for a game that has maybe a darker aspect to it, or maybe a little more violent, go all the way with it. Do it. Do The Last of Us. Make it like they did. Make it a thriller. Make it a little scary. Give it the action. Give it a little bit of that horror feel to it. Don't be afraid to go all the way. This is why the people love the games in the first place. If you're Halo, give us, we don't want Master Chief to be a one-dimensional character. He is. That's who he is. That's why we love him. He's a killing machine, and we like his adventures. We will play them till the day we die. So, give me that, please.
And it's tough because just on this side of things with The Last of Us, it's already such a great story. You don't need to do too much. So I don't want to say HBO didn't really deserve any credit because they gave us a really good product, but at the same time, they're starting off with something really great.
Yeah. Don't take don't take creative license where you don't need to. And I'll say that for any movie that we review.
Yeah.
We've talked about it with Star Wars. We've talked about it with Hulk 2003, right? Don't take liberties where you don't need to. If something's there and it works, use it, man. You don't have to make your name as a director or a writer doing something nuts. Just do something good.
Couldn't agree more. I don't think there's really a simple formula because as we can see on both sides of the coin, you can have a very simple concept of a game like Street Fighter or Tekken, and it can come out like crap. And then you have a simple concept of a game like Angry Birds or Sonic even. You're just collecting rings as a hedgehog. You can make a really good movie. And then on the other side, we have a very complicated story of The Last of Us, and you can completely make that a good product. I don't know. What's the answer? What's the formula? How do you do this, Nick?
I think it's what we were just talking about. I think you put it in the creative's hands and out of the studio's hands. You give it the budget that it deserves, and then you make it for the audience. You create the content for the audience.
What you just said really sparked something in my brain. You give it the respect it deserves because video games are great. Whether they're simple or they're complicated stories, they deserve respect and they deserve well treatment from the studios. You take a racing game like Need for Speed and then you throw a bunch of A-list actors in there and you just make a subpar action movie, it's going to be forgettable. This isn't necessarily video games, but the Lego movie. I made a movie about Legos and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
You can do it. You just have to be creative when it calls for it and let the source material do its thing when you need to step back. It's all about self-control.
You have to understand there's pros and cons to having a built-in fan base, right? Like the expectations will be high. So you have to be even more careful with what you're doing with that property. Marvel figured that out with the movies. Like these comic book fans have expectations and we have to meet them. We can't cut corners, essentially, when somebody has expectations for us. Why would you?
That goes back to, for me, just treating the source material with respect.
Absolutely.
Because I just immediately thought of Fantastic Four with Chris Evans and Jessica Alba. And I could just see the studios being like, let's just look at some comic book panels and make it a movie, whatever. And then, you get into the modern day MCU and Jon Favreau comes out with a kick-ass Iron Man movie that from an underappreciated comic book character and just gets the characteristic charm of Robert Downey Jr. and people fall in love with it. It's really just about the treatment and the respect of the source material. That's the key. That's the secret. The secret ingredient. We figured it out.
Respect the fans? No way.
Okay, well, just to close it out here, we've talked about video game movies here, but does that mean we're not going to review video game movies going forward? No! Of course we're going to go down this list of 50 worst video games ever made.
Yeah, we're watching
ever made.
Some Double Dragon and some Street Fighter.
And Super Mario Bros. 1993.
You damn right we are.
We'd be doing it. Nick, do you have anything else to add about video game adaptations into movies?
I don't, buddy. I think we covered quite a bit of our mostly gripes, but I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. I think we're going to start seeing a lot better adaptations coming down the road.
Well, like you'll see, in the top 5 highest rated movies, one other thing I didn't bring up that they had in common, they're all very recent. 2020, 2019, 2021, 2022, 2023. Bright days are ahead, ladies and gentlemen. Studios are getting their shit together and they're making good video game movies. We have a chance. We can do this.
Fingers crossed.
All right. Well, I think our time is up. We should hit the road. Next week, we'll be back on track with movie reviews. And I'm just going to say it's about green jelly people. That's my hint.
That's specific and not specific enough.
So chew on that for a little bit.
You get a week.
Head and gone, ladies and gentlemen. See you next week.
Till then.